Semambo Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Semambo Mohammed. I work as a Principal Climate Change Officer Adaptation in the Ministry of Water and Environment, and I'm here to present the Assistant Commissioner, Mr. Bob Natif, who is unable to be with us here because of other ongoing engagement, specifically in preparation for the COP26. So allow me on his behalf to give his welcome remarks, but also I'll continue with the giving a presentation of the process of update of the Uganda's national determined contribution. So with due respect, allow me to, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome, first and foremost, to recognize the arrival and presence of Honorable Minister of Water and Environment, represented by the State Minister, Honorable Beatrice Anywa. You are most welcome, Honorable Minister. The representative of the UNDP, specifically the Deputy Resident Representative, Mrs. Sheila Ngatia. The FAO representative, represented by Dr. Kenneth Igibwe. The UNEP representative, represented online by Rajiv. The GIZ Country Director, James Macbooth. The Deputy Director, British High Commission, represented by Matthew Little. And then the NDC partnership, looking at the Anglophone experts for Africa, represented by Madame Margaret Balihaihi. Ladies and gentlemen, the Director Development Planning of National Planning Authority, represented by Dr. Asuman Glover. The IUCN representative, the civil society representative, private sector, academia, and representative of government ministries, departments, and agencies. You are most welcome, and good morning once again. So on behalf of the Assistant Commissioner, today we are here to do a validation of the national determined contribution for our country. We are updating our NDC, as most of you may be aware, that Uganda chose to update our NDC, responding to the Paris Agreement provisions. And in that, we are really trying to increase our ambition in fight against climate change. And ambitions in fight against climate change are recognized in two arenas. One, mitigation, looking at how do we try to lower our emissions while trying to transform our country into middle class, as our vision 2040 really try to aspire, but also the aspect of promoting resilience to climate change, and specifically looking at adaptation. So amidst those two major blocks of climate change, there are other equally important aspects that the country must put in place in terms of the institutional arrangement, the policy, the legal frameworks, but also aspect of technology and finance. So today, I think we are very much delighted from the process that we've been ongoing since 2019 to see that the country tried to aspire to update our NDC as part of the Paris Agreement commitment. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Assistant Commissioner, I wish to welcome you, all of you, but also try to request you to effectively participate, because at the end of the day, this is actually what is going to exhibit Uganda's commitment in terms of climate change, both adaptation and mitigation. So thank you very much, and you are most welcome. So as you recognize on the agenda, there is a presentation again by our Assistant Commissioner to try to give the process we have went through in terms of updating our national determined contribution. So allow me in a few minutes to try to bring everybody to speed about what the country has been doing in terms of updating our national determined contribution. So I'll be talking about those few bullet points. I don't know if it is projected. I have some slides. Can it be projected? Okay, so I'm live informed that they are being projected. So I'll be talking about those few bullet areas, an overview of Uganda's GHG emissions, Uganda mitigation potential, why we needed to update our NDC, the approach that we have used to update our NDC. We had the current NDC, which we are updating. So we commissioned StockTech to explore the progress in terms of implementation that can guide the process of updating the NDC. I'll give a brief on to that. The overview of NDC update process, then the NDC update activities, the good practices and the challenges so far that have been encountered in the process of updating the country's NDC. So if you could really try to look at that graph, this is a graph coming from the first biannual update report for the country, but specifically it is showing that the Uganda's emission in business as usual, I think, were to increase, or they increased up to 90 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. So, and this really has been part of the basis where the country would want to go in terms of having sustainable development, but also trying to see how do we then try to lower our emissions. So this is from one of the updated reports, which was submitted in 2019 about the first biannual update report as a requirement under the UNFCCC. So in terms of emissions, apparently that's where we are standing, looking at in 2015, that the emissions for Uganda has risen to 90,000 million metric tons CO2 equivalent. So again, in the current NDC that we are revising, if you could recall, there are business as usual scenarios that have been built in the middle block there. But also we did some bit of modeling to see how much could Uganda reduce in terms of the greenhouse gases by the year 2030, because the current NDCs really go up to the year 2030. But principally, we've been working on the mitigation potential reduction, looking at the 22% reduction by 2030 compared to the business as usual, but with a number of sectors that the country tried to put forward to help us really meet our 22%. But you could look at the net coming from the LULCF, that is land use and land use change, but also the aspect of reduction from the wetland restoration. There are issues to do with enhanced energy and electricity capacity, and this is really very important. If you are to address climate change, the aspect of energy have to be really tackled seriously. So among other areas where Uganda could express its potential. In that regard, then that brings us to the reason why we need to revise our NDC. The revision of NDC, it is just not intended by a country to do that, but it is actually a call under the Paris Agreement that the countries need to increase in their ambitions if you are to fight against climate change. Science shows that the emissions have just been on increase. If you look at most of the literature, that emissions have increased, therefore calling all parties at least to put appropriate measures and strategies that could help them to work towards reducing on their greenhouse gas emissions, or even go net zero carbon. So this is a call from the Paris Agreement as part of responding to the temperature goal of the 2 degrees, while pursuing efforts to limit the increase for the 1.5 degrees. But again, the Paris Agreement also established an adaptation goal. Uganda is an adaptation-first country. Therefore, we need to really try to work towards establishing adaptation targets if we are to promote resilience to climate change as a country or as an LDC country. Again, the aspect of resource mobilization, you cannot leave it out. However much you have good strategies and plans, again, there is aspect of discipline, but also there is aspect of trying to do what we call resource mobilization to implement the strategies for mitigation and adaptation. So these are really part of the corrective goals that are really being established under the Paris Agreement. But again, there are some bit of unilateral efforts that are put forward, again, by the Paris Agreement. But this is really very important for the developed countries to undertake economy-wide absolute emission reduction targets. So it is coming from the Article 4.4. But also the developing countries were encouraged to enhance their mitigation potential, but also aspect of to move towards economy-wide emission reduction or limit targets. So these are really very serious statements that came through the Paris Agreement, and the LDCs, which Uganda is, and the small island developing countries, we are called upon to prepare strategies and plans for emission development moving forward. So in the paragraph 24 of the Paris Agreement, countries were requested to either those who have INDC goes up to around 2030 to either update or communicate new NDC. But as a country, Uganda, we chose an aspect of updating our NDC as a mechanism that can help really to bring us to low carbon development, but also trying to promote resilience. So we are using what is called the national circumstances. So we chose to update our NDC, and we are obliged to do so every after 5 years. So this is not the only NDC that we are stopping with, but we shall keep revising, basing on implementation challenges, experiences, but also the global goal in terms of reducing carbon emissions, and also trying to promote resilience to climate change. In that process, the approach that has been used, we consider that this is an international obligation where Uganda has to fulfill our mandate in terms of the Paris Agreement, but specifically under the UNFCCC. So as part of our foreign policy, but also specifically to the UNFCCC as a signatory and the Paris Agreement, we say that this is really very good to update our NDC, and the process began in 2019. So submissions have been done to CAPE, that is Climate Action Enhancement Package, where we are very much delighted for the support that we've been getting from the NDC partnership in terms of updating our NDC. And specifically, this was kind of like trying to reflect how do we increase our ambition as a country for mitigation, but also adaptation as part of the Paris Agreement, but also tracking the implementation of the NDC by accessing in-country technical expertise. So I think this has been ongoing very well, as we hear from a representative from the NDC partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, Uganda are very much privileged that we have two processes actually ongoing, but all two processes are being a response to what the Paris Agreement desires. That is the NDC, but also the LTS. The LTS is the long-term low emission development strategy for the country, but together with the NDC, which is seen as to be a short-term plan to help implement the LTS, these processes have been ongoing together, and they have been benefiting from the same analytical studies and the same empirical science that has been established, so that we see no detach of the two processes, because one is going to help to implement the other. So we're looking at the NDC as a mechanism that will help the country to implement the long-term strategy, which is the LTS, and apparently, as of yesterday, we are trying to review the LTS for the country in terms of the available work that has been done in that regard. So we are aiming at having an LTS that will go up to beyond 2050. So there was second round of submission, but also there was to the CAPE, and then the stocktake was done. In the stocktake, specifically, we are to have lessons learned out of the current NDC that we have been implementing. What are those lessons that we have learned that could necessitate the update of the Uganda's NDC? So in that regard, we worked with the NDC partnership, and we took a stocktake of the current NDC to get lessons learned that could necessitate us to have an improved NDC, which is collectively owned by the country, but that could help us aspire to increase our mitigation ambitions, but also adaptation to climate change. So the summary of what came out of that stocktake report is that there was some bit of satisfactory implementation of adaptation actions and mitigation measures, notably in agriculture, water, environment, and energy. So when we try to look at the extent to which we have tried to implement our adaptation, or our NDC specifically, these sectors, I think they came out paramount in terms of exhibiting what has been done in corresponding to the targets and actions that we put in our current NDC and update. So one of the emerging issues that came in there is about the NDC formulation was first with limited, the first one was limited stakeholders engagement. So meaning that if the first NDC had limited stakeholders engagement, it is a lesson to learn how do we then address that in the current NDC. The second year was lack of defined reference period. For example, there was no share of sector GHG emission targets in reference to the 22%. We committed to reduce by 22%, but we couldn't track how much each sector could contribute to the 22%. So we are working towards improving that so that we come up with the sector targets for the new country target, the overall target. So how much, for example, agriculture contribute to the 22%, assuming we remain at 22%, or how much could energy sector can contribute to 22%. So this will help us in the monitoring, reporting, and verification of those country targets. So there was unclear methodology and approaches for estimating and counting for the greenhouse gas emissions, and then no adaptation targets. Despite that, the 22% reduction was for greenhouse gas emissions, and then the country is an adaptation-first country. Again, the strategies were there, but there were no targets for adaptation. So we strive very much to put adaptation targets for the ease of implementation of our commitment. Limited scope in terms of sectors. The sectors were not really economy-wide. So in this new NDC, we are trying to address that, bring on more sectors on board and strategies in the current sectors that are part of NDC. Again, there was no financing arrangement for the implementation. So there was no detailed financing arrangement for the implementation. So this is one of the things that we want to bring on board. However much you have a good strategy without a financing arrangement, again, it becomes challenging in terms of its implementation. And lastly, the MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification. How do you then tell that these strategies that we committed to do are implemented? How do you track their progress, and among other things? So these are some of the emerging issues that we've been working towards improving in the updated NDC, as we will see. So the number of partners that have been supporting this, I think, allow me in the interest of time just to hit onto them. There is a key partners, that is the UNDP, GIZ, UNEP, IRENA, the RCC, we have the IUCN, among others, but including also the private sector and the civil society organizations. They have been supporting where they have a little bit of resources, but also where they can provide empirical evidence that could guide the country in terms of improving our commitment. So this process has been encompassing the NDC partnership coordinators in the country, the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and the National Planning Authority. We've been working hand in hand to see that this is a plan that we want to put for the country. So it has to be aligned to the national development aspiration, which is in the docket of the NPA, but also the aspect of finance mobilization also is very important. That's why we singled out these two institutions that we've been working with. There's a technical committee, that is the National Climate Change Advisory Committee. We've been using, it's a multi-sector committee, whereby technical people from various sectors, because we want to build ownership of the implementation of those strategies. So we've been working with such kind of committee arrangement. And over 100,000 stakeholders have been engaged in the updated NDC, both national level, regional level, but also looking at the civil society and whoever, because we're looking at economy-wide and ownership consultation. So at least we have had such kind of consultations, and then today we are having our validation of the NDC. So meaning that it's bringing everybody's interest to see how the country can move forward in terms of climate responsive, that is adaptation and mitigation. The partners are doing a number of things complementary that, for example, we are developing what we call the adaptation, in terms of adaptation targets, we are doing what we call climate vulnerability index. So you need to establish the indices that can help you to measure whether there is resilience or not. There are a number of projects that have been implemented, but when you try to track whether there is resilience building or not, it is really very difficult. This can only be done when you establish the indices and on the indicators. So this is really work ongoing. Then updating the quantified mitigation targets, because you said that there are methodologies for establishing the emission reduction in the current NDC, which we are updating now. It was not very clear. So it was really supposed to be backed up by scientific and empirical evidence in terms of making quantified mitigation targets. And we have done for the development of sectors, for example, agriculture, forestry and land use, energy, transport, industry, and waste management. You are aware that our vision and aspiration are more on agro-processing. So how do we then try to factor in all such kind of development in terms of a climate change lens? Broadening of the sectors, this has been very much paramount, but looking at also the built environment and disaster risk reduction, there's agriculture, energy, health, transport, issues to do with fisheries, among others. So we shall see in the detailed presentation, but we have tried to broaden onto the sectors and improving on the methodologies, including the MRVs. So there are a number of models that have been done using various tools, like the LEAP and so many others, including Excel files, so to try to see how best can we then improve on our methodological approach in terms of profiling the country's emissions, but also making the projections. So this has already been done. The good practice, as I'm moving towards end of my presentation, how do you maintain efficiency? I did mention that there are two processes ongoing. That is the LTS, the Long-Term Low Emission Development Strategy for the country, and the update of NDC. And we are looking at one implementing the other. The way we have our Vision 2040 and the National Development Plan. Okay? So these processes have been concurrently conducted in terms of the analytical studies that have been done, but also in terms of consultations, especially at the region and sectoral level, to see that they are not detached from one another. Whereas the LTS is identifying strategies at a strategic level, now the NDC try to tone them a little bit down because they have to be very much systematic and smart if they allow their implementation. So in terms of that, then we are trying to maintain what we call efficiency. Hybrid consultation, we had COVID-19 before us, but we need to consult because one of the challenges in the previous NDC, which were under review, was the limited stakeholders consultation. So we have used hybrid consultations, meeting in terms of the regions, but looking at stakeholders. We had the physical and hybrid. Then pooling of resources is one of the things that we have been using. That's why we have there are many partners that have been seeing them on the screen. So how do we then benefit the two processes from one another? So the pooling of resources, I think, has been very, very much instrumental as the NDC partnership representative will try to mention that, I think, in her speech. Multi-stakeholders platform, this have already been mentioned, but synergy is also very important. Synergy in terms of data, synergy in terms of scenario development, so that at the end of the day, one strategy or the NDC does not detach itself from the LTS. Because the LTS, we are looking at a longer-term country plan, which are also developing. So synergy, I think, is very important. Not only for the LTS, but also the country's vision, the national development plan, but also the sectoral plan. What is it that they have? Because some sectors have what we call climate kind of strategies. For example, agriculture has a NAP. How do you benefit out of that? Which is a long-term plan for them, medium and long-term plan for them. Challenges that you have experienced, I think this is obvious. COVID-19, I said that this process began in 2019, and we were to submit according to the Paris Agreement by 2020, okay? So we are unable to do so because we had challenges associated with COVID. Then access to data, reliable on projection and default values. We need to do a lot of improvement into that. So some sectors have data, but the data couldn't be fit as in the tools of analysis. So we have to work backwards to see what are these data fitness in terms of the tools for analysis. Others we are having data which were not well organized. So really that one took us time. But if we are doing this, or we have done that, to increase on our methodological approach in terms of creating sector emission scenarios. Coordination of multi-sector partners, and then shifting from sector to program budgeting. So the previous NDC were looking at sectors, for example, but now the government has shifted from sectors to programs. So how do you take care of that? So these are some of the things that, in terms of prioritizing mitigation and adaptation. Lastly, I've already mentioned that these are all partners. They have either contributed financially or technically, but in one or the other, all of them have been contributing to the two processes. That is the NDC and the LTS. So we thank you very much, our dear partners, for the wonderful contribution that has been exhibited to us towards the discourse of improving the country's strategy in terms of our commitment for the update of our NDC. I thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's clap for Mr. Semambo. That was a detailed update. Those joining us online and on TV, the hashtag is COP26, and then the other hashtag is climate action. And just remember that COP will be starting on 30th October, and it will end on 12th November in the UK. These conversations are leading us there. I understand that a couple of countries in Africa have already submitted, and Uganda is actually getting there in our NDC, and we're looking at very critical areas this time around. We're looking at technology, we are looking at finance and capacity building. These are very, very key in all the conversations we're having. Maybe just to bring you to speed, a couple of issues we're looking at: the climate change responsiveness, the development pathways, and all that is going to come through when we start to do this. So those online, let's keep the conversation going there. As a country, we only have 30% of our population having power. It is very disturbing. As a journalist, I've seen it very disturbing in the areas where we expect to go. We can possibly tap into the renewable energy or the alternative technology to make sure that our country can have a big cover of electricity. These are the conversations we're having. Moving forward, we're going to have our key partners who are making key considerations and support for the implementation of the Uganda's revised NDC. Remember, the model changed from government, it's going to the program bit, yet they'd planned earlier in a different angle, so they're changing. We have our key partners who are going to join us, and they're going to sit up here. They're going to be giving us what their support looks like and the considerations. So ladies and gentlemen, we have those who will be on Zoom and those who will be here in person. Join me as I welcome the Director, Development Planning from the National Planning Authority, Dr. Asuman Guloba. Round of applause for Dr. Asuman. And still, we have a partner. This is the regional, that is the African representative for the NDC partnership, Ms. Margaret Barihaihi. And again with us, we have the Deputy Director, British High Commission, Matthew Little. On Zoom, from Nairobi, we'll be having the UNEP as well as CTCN, Regional Manager for Africa, Mr. Rajiv Gang. We understand you'll be joining us a little later. Rajiv, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And still with us, we have the FAO representative, Dr. Kennedy Ibokwe. And from the UNDP, we have the Deputy Resident Representative, Ms. Sheila Ngashie. These are going to have the conversation about the entire NDC and where we are headed as a country. Not only that, from the global scale, how does Uganda plug into the bigger conversation? Now, given that this conversation is online, those following this conversation, when you put the hashtag COP26 or climate change, I can pick your comment about this conversation and we can take it a little more further. Now, to start with, I'm going to start with Mr. Glover. I understand you're very passionate, and from the submission of Mr. Semambo Mohammed, it is very, very critical that you've been supporting this conversation. From the National Planning Authority perspective, we want to know what are your key considerations and how are you supporting this agenda?
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of this process. And I want to remind you that in this same room, I was here, I think, in March to start off this process. So I'm very happy that we are starting to see the fruits of the drafting that has been going on. And from the National Planning Authority, one of the things I need to tell you is that the National Planning Authority, we crafted a national plan. And this plan, the main goal is to improve household incomes and the lives of Ugandans. And key around this is climate change. And because of that, because NDP adopted the programmatic approach, and in these programs, one key program is a program on climate change. And while NDP is very broad, I believe that the NDC is the implementation tool that gives the details that are going to arrive at the goals of NDP. So in terms of planning, this is the way to go, because the actual actions and targets, how we are going to achieve the goal of the program NDP 3 are being defined by this plan and NDC. So from that angle, I'm very committed, because without us getting the targets that we are striving for, then we will not be able to achieve what we aspired in NDP 3. And indeed, climate change in NDP 3 is very cross-cutting because it touches the people. In terms of agriculture, because the biggest program there is agro-industrialization, and if we are, our agriculture is mainly rain-fed, and climate is a key factor, and issues of greenhouse emissions become key in how we are going to have to reduce the vulnerability of our people in terms of attaining the goal of NDP 3. So when I was here, actually, I did give a few expectations that I expected, and I'm happy to be back here to tick off to see whether those expectations have been achieved in this NDC, revised NDC, that should be aligned to the NDP 3. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I've come with a tick list of things that I need to look at to make sure that these things have been achieved in terms of what's the target for greenhouse gas emissions, whether we'll be achieving it, issues related to the vulnerability index, in terms of our people, how are we making sure that they are not vulnerable to climate change, how are we becoming sustainable. Then lastly, I would also expect this NDC, the revised NDC, to be built into the focus of the plan, because the focus of the plan is on household incomes. So I'm looking at the other side, how is it improving jobs of people? Are we becoming smart in the way we are creating jobs? So I'm looking towards that conversation to see how this revised NDC is delivering on that.
Well, thank you so much. That is Dr. Asuman Goloba. Those ones online, when you mentioned about the smart jobs, George Chibalama on Twitter, he says that is his biggest takeaway today from the National Planning Authority, smart jobs. When we go now to the continental bid, Miss Margaret, when you look at all these, the conversations and the new shifts you have taken, what are the key considerations, you as a key partner in this?
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everyone. I greet also those online. Our guest of honor, Minister of Water and Environment, represented by our Minister of State, and everyone in the room, and our dear partners, especially those, the NDC partnership members. I'm really honored to be here on behalf of the NDC partnership. I must also join our colleague from NPA. The partnership is also ticking some boxes, because where we are, our senior management is sending through me a congratulatory message to Uganda for where we are now, because already the NDC interim report that Uganda submitted recently, it shows how Uganda has taken a step, and especially looking at adaptation being the priority for Uganda. If you look at how Uganda has come on board compared to the first NDC, this is really great. We look at Uganda as our champion because it has taken on board the NDC partnership support unit principles, why it was formed. All the members Mohammed mentioned, I don't need to mention them, but all the members here, all the partners are part of the partnership. And why we were formed just at the signing off of the Paris Agreement was to make a difference than before. And I think it has been realized when you look at the NDCs that have been submitted so far. The partnership was put in place, one, to increase or to improve coordination of partner members on how they can impactfully support countries to really elaborate more on the context, and especially those countries that are looking at adaptation as a priority. How do we help them to articulate adaptation and align it with the development agenda? And to tell you, Uganda has championed this as already presented, you'll see Uganda is almost the first country to align NDC process and the LOTS process. At the partnership, through the CAPE, that is the Climate Action Enhancement Package, that members put together, is just a complementary fund. But I would like to appreciate our members that have been using their own funds. The partnership has been coming in just to fix areas where partners have delayed or where partners may not have funds. It's basically technical assistance fund that we've been just complementing the processes. When you look at Uganda, about 6, 7 partners have been supporting. The NDC process, UNDP has been taking lead, plus other partners. The LOTS process, Germany through GIZ has been taking lead with other partners. But the support unit also, we've been fixing here and there technical assistance to ensure that countries have really met even the deadline. So far, the partnership supports 77 countries globally. In Africa, 34 countries have benefited from the CAPE. And so far, 7 are doing the LOTS. But those 7, none of them have managed to align these two processes. So Uganda is our champion. And the second championship Uganda has taken is this whole of government, whole of society process, which is a principle for the partnership. Why we were put in place was like, how do we get climate change beyond ministries of environment? How will we bring in finance, planning? So Uganda immediately, we started in 2018, by the way. It was the first country to launch the NDC partnership plan in Africa. And the steering was Minister of Environment's leadership to bring on board finance and NPA. By the way, you will find that Uganda's way of taking climate action has really shifted, much as there is still a lot to do, but really Minister of Finance and Environment and NPA, they are speaking together. And that's why the NPA representative here has actually mentioned on how the NDC, the LOTS, the Uganda 2040 vision, and the NDP 3, when you look at these documents, they're actually speaking the same language, which is going to make it much easier to mobilize resources. The country is going to be able to know how much domestic funds are we putting in climate action. How much should the partners outside, external funding, is coming on board. So from the partnership's point of view, we are really happy and we are still on standby. Would like to see these documents coming out very well and articulating on how the action should go. Planning is good, but we are ready to support the implementation of these actions. And of course, we are waiting to see how Uganda presents now its positioning in Africa, but also globally at Glasgow. Because really this time I see us being positioned well to negotiate much better and also taking forward. I know it may not be easy, but for me this is really a starting point where we can now see how we can mobilize more resources. So we are willing to work with the partners in the phase 2, then the next phase of planning, of implementation. Planning is over, so that we look at NDC implementation plan and we work together. Thank you so much. I'm still around to see how the discussion goes.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for that. State Minister, it is very exciting that our positioning is good on a global scale and from the African context where she represents. Well done, and more effort is needed, how we can cascade it more down. Now to talk to one of our key partners, the Deputy Director from the British High Commissioner, Matthew Little. The other day I was having a conversation with Her Excellency Kate, and your country is very passionate about climate change, and the support it gives this country is outrageously strong at all corners. When we talk about this, the support for the implementation, what is your government or the Commission doing maybe at the forefront or in the back end to see this come to light?
Thank you, Andrew. Let me come on to that. I'd like to also say a few words about COP26 and the global picture on climate change and how Uganda's NDC fits into that. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the NDC. Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, to be with you. As you said, we're 10 days away from COP26 now. Tackling climate change is the UK's #1 international priority, so we're very proud to be hosting the conference in Glasgow in partnership with Italy. The COP President-designate Alok Sharma describes this as our last best chance to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and keep alive the goal of limiting rises in temperatures to 1.5 degrees. At present, we all know the world's off track for that target. The most recent UN synthesis report shows we're heading for a 16% increase in emissions by 2030, based on current NDCs, when we need a 45% decrease. So we still need countries to go further in reducing their emissions. Now, Uganda's not a big emitter, but by committing to limit the rise in Uganda's emissions, I think you can set a path for greener growth here that will be good for your economy, for jobs, for people and for the environment, but also helps to put pressure on the countries that are big emitters to do more. So it's really welcome that Uganda's already published its interim NDC ahead of COP, and that it sets out a commitment to increase mitigation ambition and bring in more sectors, as we've heard. I'd really encourage the government to now follow up on that with specific commitments at COP. For example, joining a group of countries that will commit to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030, which is in line with Uganda's existing plans. And Uganda's voice is especially powerful because, as we all know, this is a country that's vulnerable to the effects of climate change, the 12th most vulnerable country in the world, according to one study, and it's already having to adapt. We're already having to adapt here. At COP, adaptation is going to be front and centre. The UK has had a clear message from vulnerable countries, including Uganda, that the global climate discussion needs to focus more on supporting them to cope with the climate change impacts that are already happening and that will get worse in the years ahead. So it's also really welcome that Uganda's NDC prioritises adaptation as the first response to climate change. And through the full NDC, the adaptation communication and the national adaptation plan that Uganda will produce, it will be important for Uganda to set out a really comprehensive and prioritised set of plans and projects for that adaptation. That, I think, will be the key to effectively implementing the plans. And as we've heard, that will require all parts of society, parliament, business, civil society, and also youth. And indeed, my High Commissioner is this afternoon bringing together youth climate activists and members of Uganda's COP26 delegation. Those clear plans, I think, are also going to be essential to attracting the climate finance that Uganda needs. And finance is going to be the third key focus at COP. We continue to push developed countries to meet our collective target of $100 billion of climate finance a year, and to push for more countries to commit to spending at least half of their climate finance on adaptation, as the UK has done. So you asked what the UK will do. In all of this, the UK stands ready to help here in Uganda. Our commitment to tackling climate change globally and here will last long after our COP presidency. On mitigation, we've already played a key role in building Uganda's renewable energy market and strengthening the regulator and co-financing small power plants. On adaptation, we're supporting hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers to build their climate resilience and creating new climate-smart jobs, again, that term that we heard from someone online about smart jobs for the future. Yeah. And we're providing better weather and climate information services to help people manage climate risk. On both fronts, British businesses, science and research offer world-leading technology. And on the finance side, as well as direct funding for specific projects, there are UK investment vehicles ready to back green growth, and we'll also be supporting Uganda to tap into the global sources of climate finance. So I just wanted to conclude by congratulating Uganda on the progress that's been made on the NDC process. As we've heard, are in a really good position ahead of COP26, and welcoming the commitments that have been made in the interim submission. The UK is really looking forward to seeing the final submission and working with Uganda to make the commitments a reality for all of our mutual benefits. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Round of applause for Lito. I love the fact that you've kept time. 5 minutes was very much prompt. Thank you so much. And the commitment your country makes to Uganda, the support is much more welcome. And we promise you, like she said, we're not going to disappoint at all layers. Those joining us online, I will read your feedback a little later after these presentations. Going to FAO, Dr. Kennedy, the other day, your regional representative was talking about the issue of food and all, and how climate change has changed the dynamics. From FAO, What are the key considerations about this?
Yeah, thank you so much, Honorable Minister and distinguished guests and panelists. I bring greetings to you from FAO Country Representative, Dr. Antonio Carrido. He couldn't be here because of all the competing demands. He also wished to congratulate Uganda for all the work you have done on climate change actions, not only on the NDC, but also on the climate change policy, and then other actions you have taken in the past few years. The director from National Planning Authority mentioned about agriculture as one of the important areas that we need to look at when we talk about NDC. And I would like to spend a few minutes on that. I hope I can within the 5 minutes that is given to highlight some few issues and important areas that we need to consider. As you know, agricultural sectors are the backbone of Uganda's economy, employing over 70% of the working population and contributing to 1/4 of the total GDP in the last fiscal year. At the same time, the sector continues to almost half of the country's, the sector contributes to almost half of the country's greenhouse gas emissions, and is also a driver of environmental degradation and deforestation, as well as biodiversity loss. Climate variability and change is already being experienced in Uganda and is expected to pose a serious threat to agricultural production, rural livelihoods, and food security without sufficient adaptation efforts. Crop yield decline is projected in the realm of 5 to 76%, depending on the crop type and region. And land suitable for production is projected to decline by 10 to 46%. Pests and disease are already wreaking havoc on key crops, especially coffee, banana, maize, and as disease outbreaks in livestock. Recent studies warn that fisheries and other sectors will not be spared. Rural poverty levels are on the rise in pockets of the country after decades of hard-earned progress. The recent IPCC 6th assessment report confirmed that even in the very low emission scenario, the 1.5 degrees Celsius warning threshold is more likely than not to be reached or exceeded in the near term between 2022 and 2040, and that every additional increment of global warming, extreme heat threshold relevant to agriculture expected to be exceeded more frequently. What this means is that countries' responses to climate change simply cannot exclude the agriculture sectors, and doing so would have serious implications for food security, eradicating hunger and poverty, and delivering on the Paris Agreement. Now, at FAO, we see the country's NDCs as one of the most important instruments for mainstreaming agriculture into national climate change response. Together with partners, we are supporting 69 countries on NDC planning and implementation in the agriculture sector worldwide. FAO stands ready to support Uganda in the transition towards inclusive, climate resilient, and low emission agriculture, and to deliver on the country's NDC ambitions. This, however, will require closing knowledge and capacity gaps, strengthening coherence, cross-sectoral coordination, and mobilizing resources and investment for agricultural food system transformation. Uganda cannot be climate smart and resilient if the rate of adoption and scaling up of adaptation and mitigation practices remains low. According to a 2017 report, the adoption rate for climate smart agriculture in the country is only about 30%. We need to do better than this, and we must do more. FAO is committed to providing technical assistance and working with government in developing climate resilient agricultural systems in Uganda. Currently, in partnership with the Ministry of Water and Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Ministry of Local Government, and Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, FAO is working with over 42,000 households in 33 districts to integrate and scale up climate resilient agricultural practices in their farms and communities. To this, we are grateful to the European Union through the Global Climate Alliance Program, the government of Sweden, the Global Environment Facility, and the Adaptation Fund for their financial and also technical contributions. Under the NAP-AG program, Uganda, through the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, developed its gender-responsive agricultural NAP, highlighting the vulnerability and urgency of adaptation in agriculture. It will be critical that implementation of Uganda NDC is aligned with NAP planning. We want to emphasize this, and it is our hope that NDC implementation provide an opportunity to operationalize the agricultural NAP and track gender-responsive adaptation and resilience outcomes.
Okay.
Under the new UNDP FAO flagship program, the SCALA, funded by German Federal Ministry of Environment, we aim to scale up climate ambition in the land use and agriculture sectors through the NDCs and NAPs by translating countries' NDCs into actionable and transformative climate actions. So we embrace partnership with government institutions and many development partners who are here and the civil society organizations. So we look forward to working with all with hope towards making Uganda a climate resilient country. Thank you.
Round of applause for FAO. Those following this conversation via Zoom and those online streaming this on YouTube and Facebook, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. And it's very interesting that the young ones are very much more interested in these. Now joining us from Nairobi, from UNEP and CTCN, the Regional Manager for Africa, Mr. Rajiv Gang. Rajiv, what do you make of this, given that you're sitting in Nairobi, which happens to be very, very, active about this entire conversation? What do you make of this, and what are the key considerations from your perspective? Rajiv? Rajiv, I think we'll get Rajiv later, I think because of technicalities. And this is what we're talking about, technology and how best we can build the capacity that we can have these conversations as smoothly as earlier anticipated. Now, going to the United Nations Development, that is the UNDP, we will really, guys, let's give a round of applause for UNDP, all of us. The conversation of climate change has been very vibrant in every corridor. At least for the last quarter, the conversations we've had from the UNDP about climate change are very strong. Ms. Shayla Gashia, UNDP, given that you've championed this conversation from the word go, what are the key considerations from your perspective, as well as the implementation support you're giving through?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Madam Honorable Minister, and all our partners. I think on behalf of UNDP, let me start by saying how pleased we are, to have been really a part of this process right from the onset. And really today is a great milestone, I think, for Uganda. And we really must appreciate all the effort that has, taken place over the last, several months, to reach this point. And so congratulations to everybody who's been involved in this. I think just to also situate in terms of UNDP's, engagement in the NDC revision process, actually this is, happening across 119 countries globally and 43 in Africa, including Uganda under the Climate Promise Initiative. So I think this is just to situate how critical this is, for the UN and the UNDP, as it were. I want to also really relate this in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, because when you look at really all the 17 goals, climate is absolutely critical. And we have a realization that we are now just 10 years shy. Actually, it's about 9 years to the end, to 2030. So really, this is the decade of action, for all governments, for all, civil society, private sector, for everybody. And we know that now with, 9 years to go to the year 2030, there have been very significant challenges towards the achievement of the SDGs. COVID-19 has been a big impact on this. But again, the whole issue around climate change. So climate is really very critical in the discussion around the SDGs. And we are now talking about, how do we transform lives through climate action? And this is why I also, want to appreciate also the sentiments that the National Planning Authority has made to try and situate the discussion of climate, on NDP 3. And really to just say that here in Uganda, as has been, indicated before, there have been a number of consultations, since November 2020 when, the official start of the national NDC's revision process, really engaging stakeholders across the board. To get that ownership, to get feedback of stakeholders, of communities on the ground, so that this is very inclusive and very engaging. I think for UNDP also, really this issue of inclusivity is absolutely critical. The issues around the youth engagement, the issues around gender considerations is very pertinent, in the spirit of leaving no one behind. I'm glad, you raised the issue around, COP26 and, as has been, also enumerated here. Because the whole world is gearing up for COP26. And Madam Minister, as you are part of that very high-level delegation from Uganda, together with, several other partners, there's a lot of expectations, in terms of this. But again, also to look at what is needed to be able to achieve, in Uganda. And I think issues around climate finance, technology transfer, capacity building, effective stakeholder engagement. So really, for UNDP, we have been very engaged in this, technically through providing resources, and it is, I think, very critical, as I said, to continue, with this, and be forward-looking, especially now with regard to the Decade of Action and the SDGs. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for Sheila. Make it more clear, it's a decade of action towards the SDG timelines. My colleague Rajiv has joined us. Back, Rajiv, if you can hear me. What are your expectations and the key considerations from your lens? Rajiv?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Moderator. I missed the earlier half, a couple of, specifically the last speakers because of the audio issues. Okay. But I hope I am audible to everyone.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Before going on to the key considerations and support for the implementation of Uganda's revised NDCs, I would like to present to you about a brief about the CTCN. The CTCN, it is an implementation arm of the UNFCCC technology mechanism, and it was created by the parties, for the parties, and the mandate given to the CTCN is to provide technical assistance to all the developing countries. Since its inception and being operational from early 2014, CTCN has served more than 103 countries, all developing countries. All 103 are developing countries, and we have delivered more than 325 requests for technical assistance. As CTCN, we operate on a country-driven basis through the nationally designated entities who are the focal point appointed by the respective governments. And in Uganda, this NDE is located in the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. As CTCN, we have a long history of working in Uganda with different stakeholders, with different ministries, and some of the technical assistance which probably led to or supported in revision of the NDCs are like we supported or provided technical assistance on climate resilient decision-making system for Lake Victoria region. We supported the government of Uganda in formulating a draft of geothermal energy policy with regards to the legal and the regulatory framework. We also worked on a project on identification of most suitable direct use application and technologies in low to medium temperature geothermal applications. Currently, we are working along with the NDC partnership on defining Uganda's vulnerability index and updating national level indicators for measuring resilience. And the main objective of this technical assistance, which is being implemented by the CTCN, is to strengthen the capacity of Uganda to address climatic vulnerabilities and to plan, implement, monitor, and evaluate effective and efficient resilience actions in a transparent manner. It also aims at establishing transparent and flexible systems for monitoring, evaluation, and learning of resilience. CTCN is ready to continue to provide further support to the government of Uganda towards implementation of the NDCs. We have identified 4 distinct areas which the CTCN can support further on. And definitely one of it is to develop, we have now the revised NDCs which lay out what needs to be done, but a real concrete implementation roadmap with focus on technologies and policies leading towards the net zero emission and enhanced resilience is the need of the hour. So to translate, in effect, it means translating the existing revised NDCs and developing a kind of a roadmap for implementation of the future. Earlier, one of the presenters was talking about smart jobs. We totally agree with it. There is a need to strengthen and develop national systems of innovation to accelerate adoption of technologies. CTCN is ready to support the government of Uganda if such a request comes to us. In order to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity of the various government departments to monitor the impacts of climate change or to plan for, to mitigate the impacts of climate change. We are ready to support the government of Uganda to develop a framework for the use of digital technologies for effective planning and monitoring. We have some good examples in the Africa region on the use of Earth observation satellites coupled with unmanned aerial vehicles through drones for effective planning and monitoring of the actions. We are ready to extend this support to the government of Uganda if there is such a request. And finally, at last but not the least, accessing of climate finance through any of the financing mechanisms is the core for implementation of the NDCs. CTCN has been given the mandate by the COP to support the countries and help them access climate finance. We are ready to support the government of Uganda again on this. These were just 4 distinct examples which we put forward. There are many more, and we are open for any discussions with the stakeholders and the ministries in Uganda to support any technical assistance they would like us to undertake. Thank you very much.
Round of applause for Rajiv. Thank you so much. One thing that stood out for me, the 4 are very remarkable, Rajiv. You're doing a very incredible job there. But the framework to digital planning and monitoring as a country, we need it so strong that the same technology we can have in Kampala can stretch and can be used by Ugandans in a Beam district, in Mitoma district, in Kabong district at the same wavelength. Then the access to climate financing. Earlier on I heard Mr. Semambo alluding that they need funding as much as possible. And thank you so much for committing to this kind of funding. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, all these we're supporting partners in the entire NDC conversation. Now, allow me to welcome our guest of honor, the Minister of State for Water and Environment, Honorable Beatrice Anywa, now to give us the government stand and what should we expect from government and our call to action as citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, the State Minister of Water and Environment.
Did you send us on stage?
the minister is coming to address us. She's looking for spray. COVID is real, and we urge all Ugandans to go and get vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. The UNDP representative, represented by Your Excellency Madame Shira Ngasha, the British High Commissioner, represented by Matthew Little, the FAO representative, Dr. Ingabugwe, the NDC partnership representative, Madam Margaret Bari-Hahihi. We have other development partners, my own, of NDP. We have government ministries, departments, agencies, the civil society, private sector, the media, and all the distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and protocols have been observed. I'm delighted to be here this morning, as usual, on the issue of environment. It touches me personally. And I'm happy that always associate with you, friends, for a better future. I also want to thank my staff, Semambo, for making also a passionate presentation from the ministry. I would like to take this single opportunity to welcome you all to this National Validation Workshop, updated, and we look forward moving together in this struggle. As you are aware, Uganda, like any other vulnerable countries, due to the impact of climate change, we are all threatened. Our fragile ecosystem, the people's livelihood, and even the economy, it is also threatened. So that one is one of the bases that brings us all together to seek for solutions. The Paris Agreement, adopted in December 2015, set out global action plans that puts the whole world to track to avoid the dangerous climate change by limiting global warming to well below 2 centigrades. All parties signatory to the UNFCCC, which Uganda is a party, were mandated to achieve the national world goals set to reduce the emission of greenhouses and enhance climate change resilience through the nationally determined contributions. Uganda, as you have heard, and we appreciate the kind remarks, we have made incredible progress towards implementing the actions to achieve our national determined contributions. In 2018, Uganda became the first country in Africa to develop a nationally determined contribution partnership plan. And that sets out our goals, what we want to do, and the framework for coordinating the mitigation and adaptation actions towards national climate and development goals. Several development partners have supported the implementation of the nationally determined contribution action plan, and Uganda has strengthened its enabling environment for nationally determined contributions implementation and continue to leverage on targeted technical and financial support from both the government, which we have set, and the development partners. For example, we have the Climate Change Act. As a country, this is a milestone. It helps government support the commitment legally, and actually, in it, we have been even able to mainstream all efforts towards the climate change in the budgeting process through all the government ministries. That means we want all our sectors to be climate change compliant. We're actually demanding that a certificate of financial implication be presented by all our ministries before their budgets are passed. That is how serious, as a country, we have gone. We have also the revised NDC, which we have, has been aligned to our Vision 2040 and the Uganda Green Growth Development Strategy and the Sustainable Development Goals. National Climate Change Policy, Green Growth Development Strategy, the revised Energy Policy 2020, among other frameworks which we have already put in place. The government of Uganda has made an interim submission of the updated National Determined Contribution to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to feature in the update of the key findings synthesis sub-report to be published ahead of COP26. Uganda has increased ambition and included new sectors in this updated nationally determined contribution. And such include the waste management, urban setting, transport, and building, environment and disaster risk reduction. That is how ambitious we have gone, because we see it happening. The effect of climate change, the floods, the landslides have been part of this journey. So we feel that it should be planned for better management. With the coordinated efforts of partners contributing support through various channels, including the UNDP, Climate Promise, and the National Determined Contribution Partnerships Climate Action, enhanced package through partners, the UNDP, the GIZ, the UNEP, the IRENA, the RCCC, and the ICLEI Africa, Uganda has put in place a systematic structure to ensure that the enhancement of the national determined contribution leads to increased ambition towards a low carbon and climate resilient economy. The development of the NDC implementation plan and the restoration and the resource mobilization plan to support the implementation process has kick-started with the support of the UNDP. And I want all of us to thank the UNDP for helping us kickstart. We are grateful as a country. Upon successful validation process, Uganda we shall be in position to fully report its updated NDC to the United Nations Framework Convention in pursuant to the decision in chapter 21, paragraph 24 of the Paris Agreement. We want really to be compliant, and we are walking the talk. My dear colleagues, fellow Ugandans, we should be energized as we move forward, but we shouldn't be reluctant. When we hear good compliment, it means we have made effort. But we are here as a country to double the effort, because the effect is glaring and our partners are supporting us and we are grateful. But we must, you and me, do the needful, be part and parcel of the interventions we want to undertake as a country. Our development partners, we want to assure you that we are committed to partner with you. We intend to set very high standards. We are happy that we are already emerging to be at least role models in action. We want to commit ourselves to ensure that we are on top of this agenda. As a government, we are also going to put effort in terms of management, resources, and human resource to ensure that the smart jobs for our youth, whom also we see here, is also part of the solution. I now take this single opportunity once more to thank you all for participating in this workshop of the national validation for updated nationally determined contribution of Uganda. And with God's grace, let me declare this workshop open for God and my country.
Round of applause again for the State Minister. I love the government commitment, word for word. And online we streamed it. Dear citizens, you'll be witnesses to this. As and when it happens, we'll see this come through. Ladies and gentlemen, let's clap for our panel for such an incredible submission at the different layers. And at this juncture, I'm going to request the Minister to come. We're all going to stand here with my panelists and we take a group photo for all of us because the key partners plus the government with us here, and we take a group photo. Those ones online, if you want to capture some of those submissions, the hashtag is COP26 and the other hashtag is climate action. Be a part of the conversation, adapt, and see how best we can take the climate change conversation beyond these walls to the ground. We can actually have it done for purposes of capturing the backdrop. The one in charge of photography, you let me know that we're done here. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could look at our panelists and the Minister, the issue of inclusion has been well balanced. Gender equality at this conversation is very key. Well, as we're having the group photo, we are signing out for those online on the side of the TV. We want to thank you so much, those who have been joining this conversation via YouTube, Facebook, and on TV. We are going now to leave the TV side, but those with us on Zoom, the conversation still goes forward. Please don't hesitate to give us your feedback in the gallery. We'll tap a little bit of that a little later. We're still having this moment, and thereafter we're going to be joined by Mr. Tapelo Letete, who is going to give us a revised presentation of the NDC mitigation and adaptation priorities. So for those on TV, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. But here we are continuing with this conversation.